I'm Warren Sreebney from Internet2. You're about to view a highlight reel of a session we did in August explaining the work we've done with several of our member institutions to build a cloud scorecard capability. What a year this has been, and one of the things that set it apart is the need to rapidly move from things we never thought we would be doing to full remote instruction, full remote workforces, and just doing everything in the cloud. And needless to say, our procurement processes, our evaluation processes don't move with the kind of speed and agility we'd like to see when we get into these crisis situations. So the work of the scorecard is to enable us to answer ahead of time some of the kinds of questions we typically ask of cloud vendors. What kind of security do you provide? How do you integrate with our authorization and authentication mechanisms? What compliance regimes do you adhere to? FERPA, HIPAA. How do you handle our data? Where is it stored? Have you done a HECVAT? And the idea is to get the vendors to tell us once ahead of time the answers to these common questions so we can short circuit the procurement process and move ahead with acquiring and deploying these services rapidly. So we think this is of interest to a lot of people we've talked to, and we hope it's of interest to you, and I hope you enjoy the highlight reel. And if you do, there's a full report from the working group that put this together, and we hope you'll read it, and we hope you'll join us in the implementation phase, which we're now entering in the spring. Thanks.
So we're looking at creating a scorecard that leverages the standards and best practices developed in the research and education community over the last 25 years, and specifically the Net Plus program in the last 10 years. The scorecard will be a self-assessment completed by a vendor, and institutions can use the scorecard standards in RFPs or to benchmark services against key criteria. The cloud scorecard will complement existing capabilities and efforts within Internet2's Net Plus program. And our goal, this is something we'll talk a lot about in the presentation today, is not to create new methods or standards for evaluating cloud services, but to provide a way of collecting vendor responses to their degree of adherence to existing standards and practices that the community deems is important. So this is a collection and reporting activity, not the development of a new methodology or a new criteria that those in industry will need to adhere to. And Lauren and Oren and myself will talk more about what the criteria includes later on in the presentation today. There's obviously going to continue to be vendors and services where it makes sense to do a full service evaluation, but there may also be some where the scorecard is a good entry point or alternative.
Today. So one of the reasons that we're having this discussion that Sean just described is this tremendous growth in cloud services. The number of cloud services and applications on our campuses has grown tremendously. There's some data on this slide. But even beyond this, I think this raw data, we have all experienced this on our campuses, the proliferation of cloud services, how they have grown, and the sheer number of them we're dealing with. And just as a specific example, one of the Big Ten schools shared a study they did about 5 years ago. They looked at an inventory of all their cloud services. They used some net traces and other tools and techniques to discover the services they had. And they found that they had over 2,400 cloud services being used on their campus. 120 of those were cloud storage services. And that was 5 years ago. And I'm sure if we went back there and looked today, or if you came here and looked on my campus today, I'm sure, I'd like to tell you that I know all the cloud services that we have on our campus. I'm sure that's not true. And if we did that same kind of study here, I bet we'd find, there'd be some that I don't know about. And that number is probably going to continue to grow. And I think that's interesting because, one of the benefits we often hear about cloud is scale. But what we're seeing is this sheer number of cloud services that are available, and some of them target higher ed, some of them don't, but nonetheless they are proliferating higher education. And just as we are dealing with that large, complex number of cloud services, it seems just imperative that we also leverage the scale of higher education community to support the evaluation of those services.
Yeah. So we sent out a survey to a wide range of institutions and people we know in those institutions. We got 84 responses back to the survey, which was a pretty broad, came from a pretty broad range of institutions, large, small, public and private. And we even got 4 institutions who are not even in the US who considered it important enough to fill out our survey. So these are apparently international issues. Probably the most gratifying piece of information we got from the survey was that 71% of the respondents said they would definitely make use of this kind of cloud scorecard in evaluating services as they started to choose services. So that was really a validation of the whole idea and for the work going forward. Of the areas we asked about, and we'll go into a little bit more detail here shortly, but the area that rose to the top in terms of what people are concerned about evaluating in cloud services, security is the highest, which probably comes as no surprise to anybody who's knowledgeable enough to already be on this call. Identity and privacy were also extremely important. And we also asked about accessibility, network connectivity, and compliance and regulatory issues. And you'll see the details of those responses as we go through the rest of the slides.
The initial questionnaire, we've completed a draft of the questionnaire. And I really want to thank both Oren, who's on the call today, and the working group members who were mentioned on an earlier slide for spending all the time that they did working on putting this together. The draft of the initial questionnaire, it's currently 39 questions, and it goes across these seven topic areas. And what we were talking about earlier, what we really tried to do was come up with questions that link back to existing standards and align with existing standards that our various universities are using. So we didn't try to invent new documents other than the scorecard itself, new standards or new approaches. It's really a collection of existing compliance documents with an opportunity for the vendors to point to where those documents exist or how to acquire those documents, and then a set of questions that relate to providers' compliances with different laws or standards or criteria. So next question is from Steve. Has the draft scorecard received feedback from procurement people at our institutions? So the answer is no. The draft scorecard has not been shared broadly with institutions before today's webinar. As I mentioned, this is sort of our announcement party here. We do have procurement represented in the working group, both in terms of people who work in procurement and vendor management, and people who have procurement and vendor management reporting up to them in the organization. So that's an area that's represented in the working group, and it's an area we're certainly interested in hearing more feedback from.
Yeah, so I was just going to throw out, I see that Bob asked a question around the HECVAT, and clearly I've been participating in both groups now, really helping to navigate what's unique about each, making sure that we're just not creating a duplicate effort. Because I think that's one thing we don't want, right? Is just, hey, here's another thing for vendors to complete, and they're going to say, oh, here goes crazy fragmented higher education again, not knowing what the heck they're doing. I think this serves a very unique purpose, and what I think is that as I talk to institutions about the HECVAT, there is a significant number of solutions implemented on our campuses that we have identified as not high enough risk to justify the resources to do a full assessment, get into like even a HECVAT light, things like that. But in the back of our minds, from our security, our procurement, and our privacy professionals, they'd love to know some more information about these things, right? They'd really like to have some level of documentation to show, are these guys at least checking some boxes? I think this slots in there very easily, and it's a great starting place to kind of be in that in-between space of, I am not going to be spending a significant amount of staff time doing a deep assessment on this tool because I've identified it as a lower risk area, but I need to do some due diligence. And I think this can slot in there in a very nice way, helping vendors, especially where they can identify themselves as doing such. I do think we have to be cautious because so many of these platforms, it depends on how your usage of it and what your campus is doing with it can absolutely affect that risk conversation. And so that's an important caveat. And that's something we've even talked about, as we talked about the scorecard. Do we need to say, hey, this is the level of data that we're expecting to go through this given this score or something along those lines? I think the other thing that, and I think the Internet 2 folks will agree, this is not something that's going out and being audited, right? This is vendors providing information, and it's best effort, and it's hoping that they respond as honestly as possible. There's interpretation that happens, and so we certainly have to keep that in mind, but I do think it slots in very nicely. And given, Nick Lewis has been on, of Internet 2, has been on the HECVAT team from the very beginning. The partnership between these two groups has been exceptionally strong, with Internet 2 contributing significantly to the process. So I look at these as very complementary to each other. And as Bob mentioned, I would certainly hope, hey, this is better to probably go to a HECVAT, or, hey, have you guys considered participating in the scorecard? And we're going to be able to complement each other back and forth quite well.
Just to clarify then, so the idea is that similar to the HECVAT, you're going to have this listing, and it gives you the basics. So if I get contacted by a vendor, I can go check the list and say, oh, they've already got their scorecard in there. I've already got the answers to all these questions. I know what my starting point is with them. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And I think going beyond that, I would give whomever this is credit, but I can't remember who it was in the working group, was, basically saying, hey, I get contacted by a vendor, I get an email, I get a phone call, whatever. I see something in the news, and I said, this could be really interesting for my institution. If they have a scorecard, it allows me to make a really quick snap judgment on whether this is something that would fit in at my institution or not, based on their answers to some of the questions. Do they have their compliance regime together? So that it's almost like a mini RFI response in that regard. So is the goal here that these scorecards go into a library or database of some sort available to review? I would think responses to these questions would matter based on the data involved. How do we know the classification of the data solution will be storing / have access to? And I think that speaks a little bit to Jeff's question of, or comment, I like the scorecard from the standpoint that it doesn't need to have an NDA to review. So the idea is, yes, that the scorecard would be public, probably on a website, hopefully a dynamic website backed by a database of the answers. We do know what that means for certain documents, like SOC 2s are often provided under NDA. As an example, that some documents may not be publicly listed or may not be publicly available. And also, one of the things we've considered in how we set up the scorecard is we probably don't want to host the documents, because the vendor is going to do a much better job of keeping their sort of source of truth document on their website or whatever it is up to date. So the idea really is to source, one, does this document exist? And then two, how do I get it? And we're hopeful the answer is not talk to your account executive, but that it's someone or somewhere where you can make a quick request for for the documentation. But I think it absolutely is our expectation that the scorecard would either be public or semi-public, and then that there would be some documents that you would need to make an ask for from a service provider partner. So hopefully that answers that question. I see your hands raised, so I'm gonna guess it doesn't fully. So you should have the ability to talk.
Thank you. No, I think towards the end I didn't have time to lower my hand fast enough. It wasn't. I understand to review SOX and that sort of nature, you need an NDA. I guess it was a library of these vendor responses of the scorecard you shared. So I've got 27 reviews in my queue right now, just for this week. And so if for example, there's a library I could go to and search these vendors' names before I go down the rabbit hole of emails. Can you provide me this? Can you provide me this? But on the same token, a lot of that doesn't matter if dependent upon the data. I don't really care if they have a SOC, to be frank, if it's FERPA directory and it's just a basic LTI integration. So and to the other gentleman's point earlier, I might use it one way, the solution one way, but another university might use it very differently. So I guess just using these as a starting point to see what they can even provide, I guess, is what you're getting at.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the concept of setting it up as sort of the baseline. And exactly what you said, people probably have stacks of these right now on their virtual desk as we stand up online lab environments and additional teaching and learning tools. And if we're able to help people streamline that process or get answers quicker, that's certainly the goal of what we're setting up. John, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll say the CBI was really to give vendors an ability to advertise that they are participating in the HECVAT. Just so you know, kind of funny part, it stands for Crazy Brilliant Idea because we were trying to think of a way to share assessments, and it was the best we could come up with navigating the legalities and liability that come in this space. And so that was really the focus there. And Ren Isaac's done a tremendous job of helping to facilitate and keep those up to date. But that is really the goal there, is truly saying, hey, this vendor has a full HECVAT and this is how you get it. The hope was that they would be posted publicly. Very few vendors were willing to do that. So I think this is another component, right, where these public scorecards are another ability for vendors to show that they're doing the right thing and engage in the community. And then when we get to the point of true assessments, clearly that's a deep dive where much more significant risk assessment documentation will be needed.
Ethan asks, I2 like repo for vendors to self-manage their responses. I think we're still working on that. Ethan would love thoughts on sort of the wiki approach versus dynamic searchable website approach. That's something we've been talking a lot about from the staff team that's doing the implementation lately. Or I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I would just say, yeah, the idea is definitely that vendors would be able to and encouraged to keep their responses as up to date as possible. And we've also had conversations but in the working group and within Internet too about doing something to make sure that all of these scorecards are updated on a periodic basis, so the information's not getting stale.